Shalom, everyone. This is Onia. We continue once again going through more of the variants of the book of Isaiah. There are other books that we have done, me and my friend, that we've worked on that we will get to as well. But I wanted to go through more today of the book of Isaiah. In particular, I wanted to go through in detail the section of the chapters 36 to 39 of Isaiah and 2 Kings, the parallel, because those same chapters are in the book of Kings, exactly word for word. There are some variants between the two, but they're so close that we can use 2 Kings as a parallel witness. So we're going to be going through that today, and we're going to just briefly go through a few chapters before, chapters 33, 34, and 35, and then we'll get right into chapters 36 to 39. So let's get right into it. So 1 second here. Let's share the screen. So we have here in the Septuagint, it mentions a moth, whereas in the Hebrew text, there's no mention of a moth. So the question is, how did the Septuagint get the idea of a moth? Well, probably what happened is that in Hebrew, animals have names that are actually words that can mean something else, depending on context. So in the context, it's talking about the verb, but the translator thought it was the animal. And so a moth often eats away and essentially destroys things, like destroys a garment, for example. So where here we have spoiled, so that very well may be a spoiler. A moth could be considered a spoiler, causing a garment to spoil or be destroyed. Let's see here. Now, the word for arm in Hebrew is almost identical to the word for seed in Hebrew. So the word for seed is zera, and the word for arm is very similar. I have to double check what that is. Let me see here. Isaiah 33. Let's see the word for arm. Yeah, so let me share the screen so you guys can see the word for arm. So right here, arm. So if we click this, we have a Zion, a Resh, and an Ayin. So comes from the root right here. And the meaning is to sow or scatter seed. And so it can mean seed, literally just seed, but it can also mean an arm, as we just saw. So, see right here, arm. If we, let's go back. No. That which is sown. Sowing a thing sown. Hold on. We can look at, here we have seed, sowing, offspring, so it can mean just a seed or a child. Seed, offspring. Yeah, so it can mean arm and seed. So that explains why the Septuagint translated it as seed. So see, we have arm, and then let's go back to the Septuagint so you can see it again. Right here, the seed of the rebellious versus the arm. Okay. Let's see here. Here we have in the Septuagint, it mentions the law, whereas in the Hebrew, it says wisdom and knowledge. So it does say that in the Septuagint as well, wisdom and knowledge. Piety corresponds to fear, looks like. Here we have his treasure versus the treasures of righteousness. But so what does law correspond to? So we see here salvation corresponds right here. Strength appears to correspond to treasure. So the stability of thy times appears to be the corresponding reference to delivered up to the law. So it's a very different translation there. Then we have, let's see here. So the Septuagint often does this where it combines two different words that mean basically the same thing into a single one. So we have here the earth mourns languishing. The Septuagint just condenses it and says mourns. Here we have again, Lebanon is ashamed, honed down. Septuagint condenses it, just says is ashamed. Okay. Here we have people singular. The Septuagint once again changes it to Gentiles or nations. And Isaiah is often quoted by Christians as supporting the Gentiles' conversion based on how the Septuagint says nations, referring to the Gentiles. But we've gone through before showing how most of the references in the Septuagint of Isaiah to nations or Gentiles is singular, referring to Israel only in the Hebrew. So this is just another example of that. Okay. Here we have in the Hebrew, it says, stops his ear from hearing of blood and shuts his eyes from seeing evil. The Septuagint appears to add the judgment of blood, probably because it sounds weird to say here's blood. So they added a word to make it make more sense. Let's see here. Thy eyes shall see the king versus ye. So this is an example of a Hebrew idiom where it refers to, oh, never mind. I thought it was, but it looks like the Septuagint simply, it is a Hebrew idiom, but the Septuagint appears to have put it over here for some reason instead. So right here, thy eyes, we have your eyes right here. So one of the biggest things in the Septuagint, at least in the book of Isaiah, of differences is due to word order variation, due to translation and interpretation. So we do have this again right here, singular changed to plural in the Septuagint. Like we said, that's the classic Septuagint thing that happens. We have, it says, with whom he took not counsel, neither did he understand of deep speech, so that a despised people should not hear. And there is no understanding to him that hears. So very different there. Let's see if we can make sense of this. So people, again, is in a different word order. Let's see. We have here should not here, whereas the Hebrew, it means essentially very similar, but it doesn't say not. It says more than you can perceive. So they're translating it in a paraphrastic sense. They're translating the meaning of it. Of a stammering tongue, not understand. So, stammering tongue appears perhaps to correspond with this up here. But again, the word order makes it confusing. So let's see here. Quiet habitation versus rich city. So city probably corresponds with habitation, but the interesting variant for us is quiet versus rich. We have singular versus plural again, tabernacle versus tabernacles. We have one of the stakes thereof shall ever be removed, neither shall the pins of her tabernacle. So pins correspond to stakes, but the of her tabernacle, basically the Septuagint is clarifying what it's talking about because it's ambiguous here. That's because it's referring back to what it just mentioned. But the Septuagint adds the reference to clarify. So it's more likely that that reference is not in the original text. Okay. Here we have the name of the Lord. We've seen this periodically in the Septuagint where the Hebrew says Lord and the Septuagint, for some reason, says the name of the Lord. Great corresponds to glorious. Interestingly, it says us versus you. Us is more personal, so us probably is the more original reading. Because if you think about it, from a translation purpose for people who it doesn't apply to, Gentiles or Greeks speaking people far removed from the original text, it makes more sense to say you instead of us, because us refers to someone that no longer is alive. Isaiah was including himself when he said us. So you can see why a translator would change to you to try to make it more relevant to the reader. Broad rivers. So broad corresponds with wide and spacious. Okay, let's see here. Now, here's an interesting one where it says in the Septuagint, my God is great, and the Lord is our judge, is in Hebrew and Septuagint, but the Septuagint is the only one that has my God is great. So the question is, did the Septuagint add that? It seems unlikely that they would add that. So this could be something that was lost in our copies of the Hebrew. And then it says, the Lord our judge shall not pass me by. A very interesting thing there. However, it does change the meaning. Let's see here. We have thereby, which perhaps corresponds with here. And then we do have pass, which could correspond with pass here, although we have go right here. So let's see here. The Lord is our lawgiver versus our prince. And let's check the Hebrew for that. Verse 22. Our lawgiver. It is a different word. It's not the word for Torah. It's, let's see, what did they say the word is? Whoops, 1 second here. They say it's hachek. Hachek. It basically means decrees, or the one who makes decrees. So the Lord is our our decreer. He decrees for us. He makes laws for us. So let's continue. Then we also have the Septuagint saying the Lord. We talked about how often pronouns are to be preferred over names being mentioned. So the readings of the Hebrew where it doesn't say the Lord, it just says he, is more likely to be original. The Lord is added to clarify. Let's see. And for reconstruction purposes, it's very plausible that, so we see right here, Lord, 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 and in Septuagint, Lord again. So 4 Lords in a row. The Hebrew has 3 Lords in a row. When I reconstruct this, I may reconstruct this by removing some of these other Lord references. So the Lord is our judge. He is our lawgiver. He is our king. He will save us. I may reconstruct it in that kind of way. So let's see here. Okay, so we go to chapter 34. Oh, we do have here a slightly different word order. Come near, ye nations, to hear and hearken. So to hear and hearken, it means the same thing. So the Septuagint just condenses it into a single reference. Here we have ye people versus ye princes. Very interesting variant there. Then we have people again down here. But the Hebrew says all things, or all. Okay. Let's see here. The Dead Sea Scrolls has a reading that no other version has. It says the valleys will be split. That is not in the Hebrew Masoretic or the Septuagint. Singular versus plural again. Okay. Their host refers to the stars, probably, so the Septuagint just interprets it. They translate it as an interpretation. Bathed in heaven, Septuagint translates as made drunk. And the Dead Sea Scrolls says seen in heaven. So interesting variants there. We have people of my curse in the Septuagint. It says judgment or doomed to destruction. It doesn't say my. So as we talked about, the personal language is more likely to be the original. So we would go with the Hebrew of my. Here we have has a sacrifice in Basra and a great slaughter in the land of Edom. So interestingly, the Septuagint is the one that says Edom here, and the Hebrew says land of. So most of the time it's the other way around, where the Hebrew says the name and the Septuagint adds land of. But in this case, it's the opposite. So that's an interesting difference there. Unicorns is just a bad translation. It refers to rhinoceroses. So let's see here. Okay. Now notice it says streams thereof, and then the Septuagint says her. We saw earlier on thereof versus her, and in the actual Hebrew, thereof actually says of her. So thereof is actually not as accurate a translation. Her is the more accurate translation, or of her. Okay, let's see. Throughout her generations is the translation of from generation to generation, and also it combines the two things here. Let's see. None shall pass through it forever and ever is translated in the Septuagint as for a long time. So we're seeing the Septuagint is taking shortcuts in some of the translation, condensing longer phrases. Singular versus plural, singular, plural, singular, plural, singular, plural. So again, we've got that classic pluralization of the Septuagint. Okay, let's see here. We saw this earlier. Kingdom translated to kings, her kings. I know why now. I was telling you guys I did not know why. But so the word for kingdom is Malkot, and the word for her kings is spelled very similarly. So probably what happened is the wa was not there, and it looks like her kings. So let's see here. The wild beasts of the desert, translated in the Septuagint as devils. Wild beasts of the island, translated, well, I was going to say translated as satyrs, but here we have satyr right here. So satyrs might correspond right with satyr right here. But also satyr is probably a bad translation in the Hebrew. So in my version, we probably will not translate it as satyr. We would look up the actual word and confirm what it actually means. Screech owl, translated in the Septuagint as satyrs again. Okay. Seek ye out the book of the Lord and read. The Septuagint says, they passed by in number, and not one of them perished. They sought not one another, for the Lord commanded them. So the Lord here probably is the Lord down here. But interestingly, it's my mouth. Septuagint doesn't have the my. The Dead Sea Scrolls appears to say his mouth. And we've talked before about how the letter that means my in Hebrew is very similar in appearance to the letter for his in Hebrew. This is a yod in Hebrew. This is a wa in Hebrew. Singular versus plural. Sometimes the Dead Sea Scrolls have plural where the other versions don't, interestingly. Okay, so here's an example where the Hebrew text of the Dead Sea Scrolls was accidentally omitted by a scribe, or perhaps it was fragment. Most of the scroll of Isaiah was preserved in the Dead Sea Scrolls, but the Great Isaiah Scroll, there was a few lines that was cut off, damaged, but most of it was preserved. Here we have, let's see, the desert places of Jordan shall blossom. So this is not in the Hebrew. Perhaps this corresponds with something right here. That's not in the Septuagint, up back over here. So let's see now. And then we have even with joy and singing is not in the Septuagint. It appears the Septuagint is just condensing it like we saw before. And then we have Sharon versus my people in the Septuagint. An interesting variant there. but it's unlikely for my people to be changed to Sharon. That would be a weird thing to change. So Sharon is probably the more correct reading. So here we have, again, the combining of verbs into a single verb. Strengthen and confirm is combined into be strong in the Septuagint. Here we have your God versus our God. So the basic thing, and then you versus us. So we have here the idea that it seems strange to the translator why he would say your God when your God is our God, is the same God as my God. So wouldn't you say our God since we share the same God? So the Septuagint changes it to say our to make more consistency with the fact that they both believe in the same God. But this is a classic thing in Hebrew where you will say your God even though you have the same God. The Septuagint just simply doesn't like that way of speaking, so it will change it to our usually. God, it says a recompense. He will render it. So the Septuagint might be the more accurate thing here because it only mentions God here. It doesn't mention God again. So the more ambiguous reading is more likely to be correct. The one where it has a pronoun. Anytime there's a pronoun versus a noun, typically the pronoun is more likely to be the original. Let's see here. Singular versus plural. Here we have dragons versus birds. Very different reading there. Now, when you see yellow marks here, this is my friend highlighting things that he wasn't sure about. He wasn't sure how to mark those things. Okay. Gathered on the Lord's behalf, ransom of the Lord. So a little bit different word order here. Okay. All right, so now let's get started into the parallel between Isaiah and Kings. So this is something we talked about before, where basically there's 4 chapters in Isaiah which have a parallel in 2 Kings. So the chapters in Isaiah 36, 37, 38, 39 correspond to 2 Kings chapter 18, 19, 20, and I think 21. Or it might just be 20. I'll double check. But so yeah, let's go through some of these variants. So basically the first 3 lines are Isaiah. The second 2 lines are 2 Kings. So we will basically, it goes so close, the readings are so close to each other that we can use them as a version of Isaiah. So we'll be going through that now. We see the Septuagint in both Isaiah and Kings removes all, whereas the Hebrew says all in both. So because of that, all is most likely the correct reading. We do see very often the nation Assyria is changed to Assyrians in the Septuagint. And there are a few places where the Isaiah preserves something that 2 Kings doesn't, and sometimes 2 Kings preserves something that Isaiah doesn't. So in these couple verses, is only in 2 Kings. So let's see here. Not too many variants between the Septuagint and the Hebrew of 2 Kings. We do have the temple versus the temple of the Lord. The shorter reading of the Septuagint is probably more original, the temple. Okay, so now we go back to having all 5. So the first 3 Isaiah, the last 2 is 2 Kings. And interestingly, Isaiah does not say tartan and Rab Saris, but the Second Kings does. So these are this is an extra thing, not in Isaiah. Then we have to Jerusalem, not in second. Oh, actually, Jerusalem's right here. Again, different word order. Okay, let's see here. Although it looks like, okay, so Jerusalem's mentioned twice. So mentioning Jerusalem twice, it only mentions it once in Isaiah, but it's twice in Second Kings. And let's see. Here we have this. It says this twice in Second Kings in the Hebrew. They went up and came to Jerusalem, and when they were come up, they came and stood by the conduit. The Septuagint. It's not clear if the Septuagint found that repetitive and just condensed it, or if the Hebrew. Sometimes what happens in the Hebrew is they'll write it twice accidentally. So it is very similar. So it is very possible that they wrote this twice accidentally, and the Septuagint might preserve the original shorter reading. But it could kind of go both either way. So now we have here, there came forth to him Eliakim, Hilkiah's son. That's in Isaiah. Second Kings says, it says the same thing. There came Eliakim, the son of Hilkiah, but Second Kings says, when they had called to the king, and then the Septuagint of Second Kings says, when they cried to or called to Hezekiah. So again, as I've said before, the preference is the more ambiguous thing than the name. A noun is preferred over the name. So the king is more likely to be the original text than Hezekiah. So a scribe would be like, okay, who's the king talking about? We want people to understand who the king is. It's Hezekiah. So they changed king to say Hezekiah in the Septuagint. We have here, which was over the house. This is found in, okay, it looks like which was over the house is a translation that corresponds with steward. So Septuagint is translating which was over the house as steward. It translates it both in Isaiah and Second Kings the same way, steward. And as you can see, it's very close. Basically, if there's no markings, my friend did not mark it perfectly, so sometimes he made some mistakes. But overall, if there's no markings, that means it's the same text. So here we have say ye now. The actual Hebrew says say ye, or the Greek says say ye. So even though the translation doesn't say ye, it actually does say ye in the Greek. So the only difference is now that's not in the Greek of Isaiah. But it is in the Greek of Second Kings. Now, also an interesting difference is the Dead Sea Scrolls, Great Isaiah Scroll, is the only one that says Hezekiah, king of Judah. Now, that reference that he is the king of Judah is likely to be authentic. So this was probably removed from the other versions. Let's see here. And we can look and see, like, if there's any variance, like in the Septuagint, but all the other witnesses agree, then the one odd one out is probably the wrong one. So Septuagint of Isaiah is probably wrong because every other version, so Dead Sea Scrolls, Masoretic of Isaiah, and both versions of Second Kings all agree with the Hebrew text of Isaiah against the Septuagint of Isaiah. Okay, and then let's see here. And the same thing right here. All the other versions agree against the Septuagint. Okay, let's continue here. And as you can see, it's all the same text. Say to me, once again, all the other versions say to me. The Septuagint of Isaiah is the only one that doesn't. All the versions say our God, except the Septuagint of 2 Kings. So our God is most likely the correct reading. Septuagint of Isaiah is the only one that doesn't say, and there's a whole long thing missing in the Septuagint of Isaiah. Is it not he whose high places and whose altars Hezekiah has taken away, and said to Judah and to Jerusalem, ye shall worship before this altar? Septuagint of Isaiah is the only one that doesn't have that very long thing, so probably Septuagint is the one that made a mistake there, and they accidentally removed that verse. Okay, let's continue. The one that appears to have the most differences so far is the Septuagint of Isaiah. All the others seem to be much closer. Here we have an interesting thing that we talked about how singular is changed to plural in Septuagint. Well, in Isaiah, I is changed to we, and in 2 Kings, I is changed to we. So this is another example of the Septuagint doing the singular to plural. The fact that the Septuagint does it in both books, whereas the Hebrew is singular in both books, suggests the Septuagint is simply interpreting and that the Hebrew text of the Septuagint didn't actually say we. Okay. Here we have the Hebrew Masoretic says Rabshakeh. The Septuagint says him, and the Dead Sea Scrolls says him, but 2 Kings says Rabshakeh. So that's a little bit more of a confusing thing because the Dead Sea Scrolls agrees with the Septuagint, but 2 Kings agrees with the Masoretic. So I'm more inclined to agree with the Rabshakeh reading because of the correspondence with 2 Kings, but the Dead Sea Scrolls reading, it definitely makes it more considerable, but because it authenticates the Septuagint reading. So let's see here. This is interesting. I'll have to check this later, but apparently it says in the Masoretic, in the Jewish language, whereas the Dead Sea Scrolls says this message only. But I'm more inclined to the Jewish language reading. Let's see here. And the Jewish language reading also is corroborated by 2 Kings. We have here Septuagint is translating the same exact, is adding extra stuff. Wherefore speakest thou? Why dost thou speak? Whereas the Hebrew doesn't say that. So when both the Septuagints of each one are doing the same thing and the Hebrew of both is doing the same thing, probably the Septuagint is the one that is making the change. Whether it's a question or not is interpretive, because there's no question marks in the Hebrew and Greek. Sometimes there's words that indicate question marks, but not always, or questions. We have here, interestingly, the Hebrew of Isaiah just says, Rabshakeh said. The Septuagint says said to them, and 2 Kings in both the Hebrew and Septuagint says to them as well. So to them is probably the correct reading. And then let's see here. We have another example where the Dead Sea Scrolls appears to agree with the Septuagint, but goes against 2 Kings and the Masoretic. Thy versus your. And thy is singular, your is plural. Well, another, thee and you. I would have to double check this to make sure, because my friend might have made the mistake here, so I will have to double check this though. But if this is correct, then the Dead Sea Scrolls seems to be agreeing with the Septuagint. Okay. We have in Second Kings singular word, but all the other versions say words, plural. The Dead Sea Scrolls is the only one of Isaiah that says king of Assyria. All the other ones just say thus says the king. So probably thus says the king is the correct reading. Although something to consider is the very real possibility that some of the, like Second Kings, scribes might have changed Second Kings to agree with the Hebrew of Isaiah. So it is possible that variants that are only in the Dead Sea Scrolls could be authentic, and that we shouldn't necessarily dismiss it just because it's not in the other ones. But at least on appearances, the fact that only the Dead Sea Scrolls says this, all the other versions, including Second Kings, says just the king, may suggest the shorter thing is the correct reading. Septuagint with words, Septuagint is the only one that says with words. The Hebrew of both doesn't, so we would reject the Septuagint as interpreting. He should not be able to deliver you. It says out of his hand. That is in the Second Kings, not in the in Isaiah. But I would be very much inclined to out of his hand potentially as authentic. Let's see here. Septuagint, the only one that doesn't say of Isaiah, make you trust in the Lord. All the other ones say that, so this is probably authentic. Okay, and then us, all the other versions say us. Septuagint, Isaiah is the only one that says you. So again, we'll probably go with us with all the other versions. Let's see here. Septuagint, sometimes they condense it. So everyone right here is being applied to both examples. The Hebrew uses the word twice, everyone and everyone. The Septuagint just uses it once and applies it to both. His versus your, only Septuagint of Isaiah says your. A land like your own land, a land of corn and wine, and bread and vineyards. The Hebrew says a land of, in the Hebrew of Isaiah and Second Kings, whereas the Septuagint of both omits land the second time. But again, this is an example of where the Septuagint uses the one noun and applies it to both instances. So we do that in English too often. But so a land of corn and wine and of bread and vineyards. So it's just condensing it for simplicity's sake. The reading of the Hebrew is more likely to be correct, because actually in Hebrew, you can't say this in Hebrew. You can't say a land of corn and wine and of bread and vineyards. In Hebrew, you'd have to say a land of corn and wine and bread of it and vineyards of it. You couldn't say of bread, because that's not how Hebrew works. Of has to be attached to something else directly next to it. So this is how we know that the reading is correct in the Hebrew, because grammatically it's necessary in Hebrew. We have here land of olive oil and of honey, that ye may live and not die. That is not in Isaiah. That's only in Second Kings. But there's no reason for Second Kings to add that. So what that indicates to us is that Isaiah accidentally removed the entire line. So Second Kings preserves an entire line, not in our copies of in any copies of Isaiah. Okay, us versus you again. Septuagint, both cases says you instead of us. We talked before about how us is more personal and is relevant to who it's speaking to, whereas people from later generations, like in our time, for example, you would be more understandable to us because it's talking about someone else, not about us. Okay. Let's see here. Second Kings adds a couple gods, it looks like, that are not in the Isaiah. So we have here in the Isaiah, we have gods of Hamath and Arphad, gods of Sepharvaim, and they delivered Samaria out of my hand. The Second Kings in both Septuagint and the Hebrew says Hina and Eva. So Second Kings is unlikely that they added these words, so probably Isaiah is the one that removed it. Over time, the scribes accidentally removed Hena and Eva. Okay. Lands versus nations, very similar meaning. Their versus his. Okay. Very often we'll see Lord is changed with God in the Septuagint of Isaiah. Okay, so we have they held their peace, they were silent. All the other versions say they, but only the Masoretic of Second Kings says the people held their peace. So I'm inclined to they because it's a more ambiguous reading. So, and as I said, I prefer the pronouns over the nouns. So they is more likely to be the correct reading, and all the other versions agree. Okay, let's see. We saw earlier that was over the household. Is the Septuagint just translates that as steward. Okay. So now we go to chapter 37 and 2 Kings chapter 19. Okay, so literally the same exact thing. Again, steward translation. So this is all the same text, no variance. Here we have the Septuagint of Isaiah adds reproach, but all the other versions don't say that, so probably Septuagint is incorrectly adding that. Interestingly, pangs versus children. All the other versions say children. Septuagint is the only one that says pangs of Isaiah. The mother has no strength. That is in the Septuagint of 2 Kings. All the others don't mention mother. So mother's probably not the correct reading. Okay. Here we have his master. All other versions say his master. Septuagint, the only one that doesn't, of Isaiah. Okay. Pray to thy Lord is in the Septuagint of Isaiah. All the other versions say lift up prayer. So it's unlikely that scribes would remove the reference to Yahweh or the Lord. So the text not saying Lord is more likely to be correct. I'm not sure when my friend underlined this because it's not actually a variant. Okay. Let's see. Blasphemed me. All versions except the Septuagint of 2 Kings says blasphemed me. The Septuagint of 2 Kings, the only one that says blasphemed. So we prefer the more personal language anyway. So me is the more correct reading. Here we have, I will send he shall return to his own land. Septuagint of Isaiah, the only one that says, he shall fall by the sword, whereas all other versions say, I will cause him to fall. So the more personal language of I is the correct reading. And then we have all the other versions say, he heard say concerning. Septuagint doesn't say, he heard say concerning. Okay. Interestingly, the Hebrew of Isaiah and 2 Kings quote this as words being said, whereas Septuagint changes it to be a general statement, saying the king of the Ethiopians went forth to attack him. It's being quoted as words where it says, he has come forth to make war with you, with thee. So more personal language. The Septuagint of Isaiah is the one that altered the text. Supposedly, I'd have to double check this, but apparently the Dead Sea Scrolls agrees with the Septuagint. Turned aside corresponds with the Septuagint returned, but the Hebrew of 2 Kings and Isaiah don't say turned aside. Okay. Now, all versions except the Septuagint of 2 Kings says, thus shall ye speak to Hezekiah, king of Judah, saying. So let's see. Yeah, so this is more likely to be part of the original text because it's very repetitive. He sent messengers to Hezekiah saying, thus shall you speak to Hezekiah, king of Judah, saying. Septuagint, the only one that doesn't have that of 2 Kings. So, and the fact that even the Septuagint of Isaiah has it is a strong indication that it's part of the original text. Okay. All lands, Septuagint of Isaiah translates, or no, wait, let's see. Apparently that's Dead Sea Scrolls. Is that Dead Sea Scrolls? No, wait, hold on. Oh no, that is I think that's the Septuagint. So the Septuagint said the whole earth. That's a translation of all lands right here. Okay, the children of Eden, all versions say that except the Septuagint of Isaiah. The Septuagint adds land of. We've seen that before. The Septuagint is the one that adds land of, whereas the Hebrew doesn't say that land of. It just says the name. And the Septuagint of Isaiah butchers the spelling of the names. The other versions get it correct. Now, remember we saw earlier back here, where was it? Where it said the names. Where was it? Right here, the names. So Sepharvaim, Anna, Hina, and Eva. That's not in Isaiah, but it's in 2 Kings. Well, down here, we see that it's in both Isaiah and in 2 Kings. Where is it? Right here. See? Sepharvaim, Hina, and Eva. It's in all versions this time. The Dead Sea Scrolls also says and Samaria. Interesting reading there. Then all the other versions say hand of, whereas the Septuagint of Isaiah doesn't. But the hand of is a Hebrew idiom, so it is part of the original text. And Hezekiah went up to the house of the Lord. Septuagint says he. Now, we do have Hezekiah down here in the Septuagint, but not in the of 2 Kings, but not in Septuagint of Isaiah. So, on the one hand, it appears the Septuagint is the one changing it. But on the other hand, I would probably reconstruct the original text in line with the Septuagint just because I prefer the pronouns over the names. So he, I believe, even if the Septuagint changed it to he's probably the original text instead of Hezekiah, because Hezekiah was mentioned right here already. So it doesn't need to mention Hezekiah again. Okay, and then Septuagint of 2 Kings, the only one that doesn't say Hezekiah prayed before the Lord. So there's no reason for scribes to add that. So it is part of the original text. Okay. Septuagint adds "O Lord" twice. So my friend sometimes forgot to add the Dead Sea Scrolls line, it looks like. He did that a few times in some of the verses. Let's see here. Skipping some of these. Here we have the 2 Kings says Lord God. Hebrew Masoretic of Isaiah says Lord, but the Dead Sea Scrolls says Lord God. Septuagint says just God. So Septuagint seems to agree with Masoretic of Isaiah, but the Dead Sea Scrolls agrees with 2 Kings. So we would probably go for the 2 Kings reading as more authentic. Thus says the Lord God of hosts, only found in 2 Kings Septuagint. So probably not part of the original text. Let's see here. Again, we talked about God often is substituted for Lord in the Septuagint of Isaiah. So now let's see. Servants appears to be translated in the Septuagint as messengers for some reason. We saw that earlier as well. All the versions say my except the Septuagint of Isaiah. So personal language we prefer. His border, the Septuagint in both removes his border. So, let's see. Yeah, so we would go with the Hebrew reading. Okay. Septuagint of Isaiah significantly reduces this, shortens this significantly. Where 2 Kings Septuagint puts the sole of my foot down here instead of back here. It's slightly different word order, but same basic text. Okay. 2 Kings Septuagint shortens it appears. Hast thou not heard long ago that I have formed it, of ancient times that I have formed it? Let's see. So overall, so far, we see that the 2 Kings is corroborating the basic text of Hebrew, Isaiah, against the Septuagint. Interesting variant here, we have I weakened hands versus therefore their inhabitants were of small power. They were dismayed and confounded. I typically prefer the first person language, but the fact that it's so shortened in the Septuagint makes a case against that reading. And then they were as the grass of the field and as the green herb, as the grass on the housetops, and blasted before it be grown up. Septuagint of Isaiah condenses the idea significantly. They withered, they became as dry grass on the housetops and as grass. So significantly shortened there. All the other versions agree with the longer text. Thy coming in and thy rage against me. Septuagint of Isaiah removes thy rage against me, and the Septuagint of 2 Kings removes thy coming in. But the Hebrew of both says the full thing. So we would go with the Hebrew. All the others say my ears versus Septuagint Isaiah me. Again, this is Hebrew idiom, my ears. We would typically, people don't talk like that in other languages. They just say me. My versus a. So my is more personal. Same thing right here. Okay. My friend highlighted this because he wasn't sure how to do this. See, he says confused about the ones in here. So I'll have to fix that in my edit of his work. Interestingly, we have in the Dead Sea Scrolls, for some reason, it's a different word order, where we have Zion here and Jerusalem way at the end, whereas in all the other readings, it's Jerusalem first and Zion last. Okay. So yeah, overall, look at this. It's very close text. Here we have, it came to pass that night. The Isaiah does not say that night. That's only in 2 Kings. Early is in all of the versions except Septuagint of Isaiah. We talked about how and is punctuation added by scribes, so and is not part of the original text. Went and returned, Septuagint simply condenses it into departed. Mesarak of the Septuagint of 2 Kings is just a misspelling. All the other versions say land of Armenia except the Septuagint of Isaiah. All right, so that's chapter 37. So overall, very close to 2 Kings. Now we have chapter 38, corresponding to the chapter 20 of 2 Kings. And we have, he turned his face. That's the Hebrew of 2 Kings. Now remember, I prefer the pronoun. So I would go with this reading more as the more authentic. Even though it's the sole witness, it is stronger in the fact that it's the Hebrew of 2 Kings. And so I'm inclined to agree with the he reading. Okay. So 2 Kings, the only one that says it came to pass after Isaiah was gone out into the middle court. It's not in Isaiah, but that is part of the original text. There's no reason why a scribe would add that. So it was removed in the book of Isaiah. So sometimes we're seeing 2 Kings is preserving the original text that Isaiah is not. Go say to Hezekiah, the captain of my people, the ruler of my people. So this is very personal language and makes more sense to be removed rather than added. So 2 Kings is preserving something Isaiah is not. Then we have here, look, another thing that 2 Kings preserves that Isaiah doesn't. I have seen thy tears. Behold, I will heal thee. On the third day, thou shalt go up to the house of the Lord. That's not in Isaiah. But then it says, I will add to thy days. Okay. Now, my friend didn't always mark it. I have to double check this. But so sometimes there's different different verse order in 2 Kings. So I'd have to check that on a different time. But he lined it up so that all the same text lines up. So, okay, I will deliver thee. Okay, so then here, for my own sake and for my servant David's sake. So interestingly, 2 Kings says that Isaiah Masoretic, Isaiah Septuagint does not, But the Great Isaiah Scroll and the Dead Sea Scrolls agrees with Second Kings. So that is a very strong corroboration, and that is part of the original text of Isaiah that was lost in all modern copies. All other copies outside of the Dead Sea Scrolls of Isaiah lost this part for my own sake and for my servant David's. This is proven by Second Kings having the fuller text. Now we have only in Second Kings and not in Isaiah at all. Isaiah said, take a lump of figs, and they took and lay it on the boil, and he recovered. And Hezekiah said to Isaiah, what shall be the sign that the Lord will heal me, and that I shall go up to the house of the Lord the third day? So all of that is not in Isaiah. Then, interestingly, it says here the third day too. Then it goes and Isaiah says, this shall be the sign to thee from the Lord. The Lord will do this thing that he has spoken. But now, look, Isaiah does not have the text. Only Second Kings does. Shall the shadow go forward 10 degrees or go back 10 degrees? This is a question that's being asked of Hezekiah. It's not in the book of Isaiah. But then Hezekiah responds, but there's nothing he was responding to. Sorry, my bad. I made a mistake here. So again, this is something in 2 Kings, not in Isaiah. It says, Hezekiah answered, it is a light thing for the shadow to go down 10 degrees. Nay, but let the shadow return backward 10 degrees. So all this back and forth between Hezekiah and God through Isaiah is not in the book of Isaiah. It's only in 2 Kings. Now, there's no reason why the 2 Kings scribe would add this dialogue. So this is part of the original text that somehow the scribes of Isaiah lost. Isaiah the prophet cried to the Lord. Let's see here. I will turn back. Wait, hold on. So then the Isaiah says, behold, I will bring again the shadow of the degrees, which is gone down in the sundial of Ahaz 10 degrees backwards. So the sun returned 10 degrees, by which degrees it was gone down. 2 Kings does this a little differently. It says, Isaiah the prophet cried to the Lord, and he brought the shadow 10 degrees backward, by which it had gone down in the dial of Ahaz. So, on the one hand, we have a dialogue back and forth of Hezekiah being asked, what should the sign be? And then Hezekiah asks for a certain sign. The Isaiah text simply has God declaring that this will be the sign. So, interesting difference. But I'm inclined to the 2 Kings reading. Then we have only in Isaiah and not in 2 Kings. So now we have the opposite direction where 2 Kings has lost this text. It's not in the text of 2 Kings. It's only in Isaiah. And there's no reason why the scribes of Isaiah would make this up. So this is also authentic. And it was originally part of 2 Kings and it got removed by scribes. So the writing of Hezekiah, king of Judah, when he had been sick and was recovered of his sickness. I said in the cutting off of my days, I shall go to the gates of the grave. I am deprived of the residue of my years. I said, I shall not see the Lord in the land of the living. I shall behold man no more with the inhabitants of the world. My age is departed and is removed from me as a shepherd's tent. I have cut off like a weaver my life. He will cut me off with pining sickness. From day to night wilt thou make an end of me. I reckoned till morning as a lion, so will he break all my bones. From day to night wilt thou make an end of me. Like a crane, a swallow, so did I chatter. I did mourn as a dove, my eyes fail upward O Lord, I am oppressed. Undertake for me. What shall I say? He has both spoken to me and himself has done. I shall go softly all my years in the bitterness of my soul. O Lord, by these shall they live, and all these is the life of my spirit. So wilt thou recover me and make me to live. Behold, for peace I had great bitterness, but thou hast in love to my soul from the pit of corruption, for thou hast cast all my sins behind thy back. For the grave cannot praise thee, death cannot celebrate thee. They that go down into the pit cannot hope for thy truth. The living he shall praise thee, as I this day. The father to the children shall make known thy truth. The Lord was ready to save me. Therefore we will sing my songs to the stringed instruments all the days of our life in the house of the Lord. For Isaiah had said, oh, okay, so actually this text, so I said earlier this was not in the text, but it is in the text, but it's in a different place. So remember, 2 Kings had this text, but it was earlier. Here we have the text, but it's way back, way over here. So, so all this other stuff is missing in 2 Kings. But this part down here is in 2 Kings. What is the sign that I shall go up to the house of the Lord? Let's go back for a second. What is the sign? Let's see what was said here. That I shall go up to the house of the Lord the third day. So, very interesting what's going on here. So when I reconstruct this, I'll have to take into account the two different versions from 2 Kings and Isaiah and reconstruct what the original text was. Now, with that said, let's take a look at some of the variants here for Septuagint. We have salvation of Israel. There's no mention of Israel in the Hebrew, interestingly. And then we have, I shall no more at all see man. So man corresponds to man right here. But Israel, that's a very interesting variant. Okay, and then Septuagint, significantly condensing the text here. Also, interestingly, the Hebrew says, I have cut off like a weaver. The Septuagint removes the comparison and just says, parted with the remainder of my life. Oh, I know, here it is, weaver's web, cut off like a weaver. So very interesting. It's different word order. Okay. Will thou make an end of me corresponds to, for I was so given up. Here it's like a crane, a swallow. See, it says or in italics. Or is not actually part of the text. So the Septuagint interpreted crane and swallow as the same animal, a crane swallow, and so they translated it as a swallow. My eyes feel upward. The Septuagint says, well, what's upward? Heaven is. So it appears that they added a reference to heaven. And then the Septuagint makes this significantly shorter right here. There's no reason for the scribes to add this in the Hebrew, so the Septuagint is the one condensing this. Behold, for peace I had great bitterness. all that's not in the Septuagint. Overall, the Septuagint has the appearance of high condensation and interpretation throughout the entire book of Isaiah. We do see also that repetition is removed often in the Septuagint. If it says living, living twice in a row, they just change it to one time. Okay. So look, it says in verse 19, the living, he shall praise thee as I this day, the Father. Let's see. I wonder if my friend made a mistake on this because, look, it doesn't make sense right here. I don't know. I see to the make. So I'm thinking he might have made a mistake there. I'd have to corroborate it by checking it. But anyways, let's see. We is changed to I. Our. So here's the thing. Hezekiah is the one talking. So the scribes were like, well, why does it say we? So who's we? Who's Hezekiah talking about? So the scribes changed to say I, so that it refers only to Hezekiah. Okay. So now let's go to the next chapter. Chapter 39 of Isaiah and 2 Kings, chapter 20, the second half of 2 Kings. All the other versions say Merodach Baladan. The Hebrew of 2 Kings is the only one that has the spelling error. It says Berodach. So Berodach is a wrong spelling. And Merodach, I believe, corresponds to Marduk, the god Marduk. So that name Merodach means Marduk. So Berodach is a spelling error in the Masoretic text of 2 Kings. Had been sick to death. Isaiah Septuagint, the only one that says that. Ambiguity is more preferred here. So sick. All other versions agree sick. So you'll go with that. Then let's see here. 2 Kings. So Isaiah is the only one that says and was recovered. 2 Kings doesn't say and was recovered. Okay. Let's see here. Precious things translated in both Septuagint of Isaiah and 2 Kings as spices. So we can trust that the Hebrew reading is the correct reading. House, the Septuagint of Isaiah pluralizes it like they normally do. Okay. Hebrew of 2 Kings, the only one that does not say to me. All other versions say to me. So we would go with the to me reading. Then said he. All other versions say agree with said he. But Septuagint of Isaiah says and Isaiah said by mentioning the name. As we said, I prefer the ambiguity, the pronoun over the name. So the pronoun reading I go with. In contrast, we have here Hezekiah. All versions say Hezekiah except the Septuagint of 2 Kings. And what's interesting is a scribe would have a strong motive to add the name Hezekiah because it's ambiguous. Who's it talking about? He said, what saw they in thy house? And he said, so who's he? In context, we know it's Hezekiah, but it could be very confusing. So it would make sense for the scribes to add Hezekiah. Let's see here. Septuagint in both versions, the only one that says, yea, also what was in my treasuries. Here is Isaiah says, "Word of the Lord of hosts," and Second Kings says, "Hear the word of the Lord." So no of hosts in Second Kings. Septuagint says Isaiah said to him instead of Hezekiah, but again, I do prefer the pronoun versus the name. Let's see. And when I say I prefer, I'm not saying which I like better, but which I believe is more original, more authentic, per the original text. So let's see. Which thou hast spoken versus he. Septuagint says he both times. Thou is more personal language, so we would go with thou reading. Peace and truth, or peace and righteousness. Septuagint of Second Kings, the only one that just says peace, so we would go with the peace and truth reading. Okay, so that is the parallel. As we could see, very clear that these chapters are the same exact text. So the question is, how did this happen? How did so much of Second Kings and Isaiah appear to be the same? I believe that this was added into the book of Isaiah. It was not originally part of the book of Isaiah. So let me stop sharing for a second. So I basically believe that there was more than one book of Isaiah. Just as we know, there's various apocrypha books of scripture of the prophets. So we have in the Dead Sea Scrolls fragments of another book of Ezekiel. And Josephus says Ezekiel wrote 2 different books. We have fragments of Jeremiah, extra prophecies of Jeremiah in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So very plausibly, Isaiah also had other prophecies in another book. So the idea that all his prophecies were just in the book of Isaiah is unlikely. So I believe that there was another book of Isaiah, we do have the apocryphal book of Isaiah called the Ascension of Isaiah. I just believe that the apocrypha Isaiah was even longer. There was a much longer Isaiah book that we don't have anymore. And it included the Ascension of Isaiah, but it also included this long section that Second Kings has. I believe the original text of Isaiah did not have these chapters that correspond to Second Kings. So as a parallel, let me show you guys an example of so this is something called the additions to Daniel. So let me show you guys this concept. I'm sure you guys are familiar with this probably, but let me just, whoops, 1 second here. Okay, so let's share the screen with showing additions to Daniel. So the full text of Daniel includes 3 chapters not found in the Hebrew / Aramaic text of Daniel. The text of these chapters is found in the Septuagint version of Daniel. So it's the prayer of Azariah and the song of the 3 holy children. It's in the chapter where the fiery furnace is. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are thrown in the furnace. They are saved by an angel, and then they sing a prayer. So this whole lengthy prayer and song is not in our copies of the Hebrew, but it is in the Greek version. Then we have the story of Susanna and the elders. Many manuscripts add it in the beginning of the book of Daniel. Some add it at the end of the book of Daniel. And it's a story about Daniel. And he judged Susanna as righteous and pure and innocent, and the elders as evil and wicked. And they were killed for their wickedness. And then the story of Bel and the dragon, or the serpent, Daniel 12:13. So it's after that in the Greek manuscripts. It adds it at the end of the book of Daniel. So the question is, are these 3 sections originally part of the book of Daniel? And I believe they were not. They were added by scribes into the book of Daniel in the Septuagint version. So the question is, why did they add it into the text? Why would they do such a thing? Well, because it had stories of Daniel, and let's take a look. This is the Net's translation of Daniel, where it says, we're going to look, whoops, my bad. Hold on. Wrong one. It's additions to Daniel that we're looking for. Additions. One second here. Additions to Daniel Nets. Hold on. Where? Let's see. Susanna Nets PDF. Okay. One sec. I need to show you guys. Maybe it's Bell and the Dragon. Bell and the Dragon PDF. One sec, guys. All right, here it is. So let's take a look. Let's zoom in. All right. So in the Septuagint of Bell and the Dragon, in the original Septuagint, it says, from a prophecy of Habakkuk, the son of Joshua of the tribe of Levi. So, according to the Septuagint, the original Septuagint text, this is an extract from an apocryphal book of Habakkuk. But because it talks about Daniel, it was added. People liked the story so much, and they loved how much Daniel was in the story. They wanted it to be part of the Bible or part of the traditional Old Testament. So they added it from the apocryphal book of Habakkuk into the book of Daniel. And so I believe the Susanna story also comes from that same apocryphal book of Habakkuk. And we have, let's see here, 1 second here. There is a list of apocrypha books which mentions let me see, hold on 1 second. It mentions apocrypha book of Habakkuk. So let me show you guys. One second here. Okay, so let's share the screen. So we have here something called the Stichometry of Nicephorus. And this is a list of books of scripture, including apocrypha books. And so I don't know why. Hold on. So we have here, I'm not sure how big this is on the screen. The books of Maccabees, all three of them together, 7,300 lines. Wisdom of Solomon, 1,100 lines. The Wisdom of Sirach, 2,800 lines. Psalms and Odes of Solomon, 2,100 lines. So you have Esther, Judith, Susanna, Tobit, Revelation of John, Revelation of Peter, Epistle of Barnabas, Gospel of the Hebrews. It gives the New Testament writings as well, but then it also has Enoch, 4,800 lines, the Testaments of the 12 Patriarchs, 5,100 lines, Testament of Moses, Assumption of Moses, Testament of Abraham, Book of Eldad and Medad, a Apocalypse of Elijah, Apocalypse of Zephaniah. Then it says also pseudepigrapha of Baruch, Habakkuk, Ezekiel, and Daniel. So Christians had copies of the Apocrypha book of Ezekiel, the Apocrypha books of Baruch, of Daniel, and of Habakkuk. It doesn't give the lines for these, but it tells us that they existed. So there was an apocryphal book of Habakkuk. And we can look right here. Oops. It's a little blurry, but see, Enoch, Testaments of Patriarchs, Testament of Moses, Testament of Assumption of Moses, Eldad and Medad. And we have Baruch, Habakkuk, Ezekiel, and Daniel books as well. So, because we have this concept of extracts from other books that had prophecies of Daniel taken from those other books and added into the book of Daniel, isn't it possible that the same thing happened in the Hebrew copies of Isaiah, where the scribes saw this huge story about Isaiah in 2 Kings, nowhere in the book of Isaiah, and they decided, you know what? This is such an amazing story of Isaiah. How could it not be part of the book of Isaiah? Let's add it into the book of Isaiah as an addition, because it should be there anyway. And also, the book of books of Chronicles seems to imply that it's part of the book of Isaiah. So the scribes were like, well, Chronicles says it should be in Isaiah, but it's not. So we should add it into Isaiah because Chronicles says it should be there. So let me show you the text of 2 Chronicles, which says it. Let's see if we can find it. And that is, okay, that is, okay, so let's share the screen. Hold on one second. I just got to check on something. 1 second here. Okay, so let's take a look now at 2 Chronicles, and that is chapter 32. The rest of the acts of Hezekiah. Now this was after we saw chapters 36 to 39 from Isaiah verbatim in 2 Kings. And then after that it says, and the rest of the acts of Hezekiah and his goodness, indeed they are written in the vision of Isaiah the prophet and son of Amos in the book of the kings of Judah and Israel. Now, I've shown in my videos that when it says book of kings of Judah and Israel, that's the name for book of 1st and 2nd Kings. So we see in 2nd Kings, 1 second here. Yeah, so we see in 2nd Kings that it has the entirety of those chapters about Isaiah, but Chronicles is telling us that the rest of the acts of Hezekiah are written in the books of Kings and in the book of Isaiah. And so when you go to 2 Kings, you see those chapters about Isaiah, and they're not in the book of Isaiah. So scribes are left with a conundrum. Chronicles says it's written in Isaiah, but it's only in Kings and not in Isaiah. So what should we do? Well, we believe Chronicles is correct, so let's add those chapters back into the text of Isaiah, because some scribe must have removed them for some reason. So they added them back in. But I believe they were never part of the original text in the first place. And the reason for that is the text is entirely foreign to the style of Isaiah. So watch this. Isaiah, it's not going to show the whole thing. All right, chapters 1 to 49. So watch. Let's see how many times we see the name Isaiah occur. Okay, so we have one time right here in verse 1. And that's not even part of the original text. That's a later scribe saying this is the book of the vision of Isaiah. Okay, then this is another scribe saying this is the word that Isaiah saw. So now we finally have a thing that says, the Lord said to Isaiah. So far it's only one time in the narrative. One time in the narrative that it said Isaiah so far. Okay, so that's one. Whoops, I'm sorry. Let me go. Okay, so one time. Now this is another introduction. The burden against Babylon, which Isaiah the son of Amos saw. So a scribe added that. That's not part of the text. Okay. In the year that Tartan came to Ashdod, when Sargon, the king of Assyria, sent him, and he fought against Ashdod and took it, at the same time, the Lord spoke by Isaiah the son of Amos, saying, that's debatable whether a scribe added it or not. So I guess we'll count it. Okay. So 2, 3 times. Then the Lord said, just as my servant Isaiah. Okay. So that's the 3rd time. All right. So now we go into the section, chapter 36 to 39. All right. So keep in mind, in 35 chapters, Isaiah's name was mentioned only 3 times. One of those times may have been by a scribe. So 2 times only. Really. Now let's see. Chapter 37. 1 time, 2 time, 3 time, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 times in this section. Also, this reads very much like 2 Kings. When you go to the text of 2 Kings, there's a certain style of 2 Kings. Like it introduces a king and says, the king did this and such like such and such. So in the introduction, it reads very much like 2 Kings. This does not read like Isaiah at all. This reads like an extract from 2 Kings. Came to pass in the 14th year of Hezekiah. So nothing about this is involving Isaiah at all. If you go, it's all about Hezekiah. So see, all of chapter 36 has nothing to do with Isaiah. It doesn't mention Isaiah at all. Then in chapter 37, we see Isaiah. Now, throughout all the other part of the text, it's always Isaiah. It's always Isaiah talking, giving a prophecy. Or Isaiah is directly mentioned in the text. So, so right here, in the year that King Uzziah died, Isaiah is talking, saw the Lord. Okay, chapter 7, it came to pass in the days of Ahaz. So a short little thing. Then the Lord said to Isaiah. So we have one little paragraph, and then Isaiah comes onto the scene, and it's all about Isaiah. Isaiah is talking. Isaiah is talking. The Lord said to me, Isaiah. So all throughout, this is Isaiah. Isaiah's prophecies. But when we get to chapter 36, all of a sudden, it breaks the theme or style and interrupts the flow of the book. And now it reads like a book, part of 2 Kings. And it's word for word from 2 Kings. So the best explanation for this is that the scribes took this literally word for word from 2 Kings. There's no better explanation than that. Because it absolutely interrupts the flow of the text. Now, also something very interesting that goes against what the scholars say about the book of Isaiah is scholars say that Isaiah was not written by just Isaiah. It was written by different people. So Proto-Isaiah, then there's something called Deutero-Isaiah and Trito-Isaiah. So they say that chapters 1 to 39 were written by one author, chapters 40 to 55 written by another author, and then chapters 56 to 66 written by a different author. But I can prove that they are wrong about this because when you remove chapters 36 to 39 from the text, assuming that it was added into the text from 2 Kings, chapter 35 directly flows into chapter 40 with no break. It is directly linked. So it is highly illogical and nonsensical to say that the person who wrote chapter 40 is a different author than who wrote chapter 35, because it literally is part of the same prophecy. So the scribes got confused, or not the scribes, the scholars get confused by chapters 36 to 39 because it interrupts the flow. But when you remove those chapters, it's so obvious, so clear that they are part of the same text. Now, interestingly, it says Vision of Zion, perhaps a later edition. Some scholars say this could be a later edition. But the thing is, 34 to 35 definitely is linked with chapter 40. So if it is a later edition, then it should be part of what they call Deutero-Isaiah. They say Deutero-Isaiah starts with chapter 40. It absolutely does not start with chapter 40. It starts with chapter 34 or even earlier. And I showed this a week or two ago, but I want to show it again. Thank you for your support. I always appreciate it. Shalom. Thank you. So let's go into the text again and remember what we said. So highway. So if we look, chapter 40, comfort, yes, comfort my people, says your God. Speak comfort to Jerusalem and cry out to her that her warfare is ended. Her iniquity is pardoned, for she has received from the Lord's hand double for all her sins. So why, first of all, in the other places it says Isaiah started talking. Well, it doesn't tell us here. So why does it go from, look at the translation of this, chapter 39, the extract from 2 Kings. Then it goes back randomly to chapter 40 with no introduction whatsoever, no segue, no transition. Comfort my people. Speak comfort to Jerusalem. Why? Her warfare is ended. What warfare is he talking about? What iniquity is being pardoned? What's going on? The voice of one crying in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord, make straight in the desert a highway for our God. Every valley shall be exalted, every mountain shall be brought low. Crooked places shall be made straight, rough places smooth. The glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. The mouth of the Lord has spoken. The voice said, cry out, and he said, what shall I cry? All flesh is grass, and all its loveliness is like the flower of the field. The grass withers, the flower fades, because the breath of the Lord blows upon it. Surely the people are grass. The grass withers, the flower fades, but the word of our God stands forever. Zion, you who bring good tidings, get up into the high mountain, O Jerusalem. You who bring good tidings, lift up your voice with strength. Say to the cities of Judah, behold your God. Okay, so we have all this right there. And then, let's see here. And I think there's something about, where's Lebanon? Yeah, then it mentions Lebanon right here. Okay. And so that's chapter 40. Lebanon. Whoops. Okay, let me see. Hold on 1 second here. Carmel. Let's see. Carmel. Okay, so no, just the one reference to Lebanon. All right, so now with that said, so highway, right? Oh, come on. Chapter 40. So now watch this. If we take 36 to 39 and remove it based on the view that it was added from 2 Kings into the text, now we're going to see something. So we'll remove, let's just do chapter 30 to 35 and then 40. Okay. Whoops. Hold on. I got to do Isaiah 40 to 66. Why is it doing that? Oh yeah, now I know why. Because it splits it up. Okay. So we have here directly prior, chapter 35. Let's take a look. Well, let's go back a little further to give you guys the context overall here. Okay, so we have here burden against the beasts of the south. Then we see judgment on Assyria. Behold, the king will reign in righteousness, princes will rule with justice. Justice will dwell in the wilderness. Righteousness remain in the fruitful field. The work of righteousness will be peace. The effect of righteousness, quietness, and assurance forever. My people will dwell in a peaceful habitation, in secure dwellings and in quiet resting places, though hail comes down on the forest and the city is brought low in humiliation. Okay, and then it says, woe to you who plunder, though you have not been plundered, and you who deal treacherously, though they have not dealt treacherously with you. When you cease plundering, you will be plundered. When you make an end of dealing treacherously, they will deal treacherously with you. The Lord is exalted, for he dwells on high. He has filled Zion with justice and righteousness. Then it says, okay, Lebanon is mentioned. Sharon is like a wilderness. Bashan and Carmel shake off. Now I will rise, says the Lord. I will be exalted. I will lift myself up. The people shall be like the burnings of lime. The sinners in Zion are afraid. Fearfulness has seized the hypocrites. Who among us shall dwell with the devouring fire? Your eyes will see the king in his beauty. They will see the land that is very far off. Your heart will meditate on terror. Look upon Zion, the city of our appointed feasts. Your eyes will see Jerusalem, a quiet home. Okay, there the majestic Lord will be for us, a place of broad rivers and streams. The Lord is our judge. The Lord is our lawgiver. The Lord is our king. He will save us. The people who dwell in it will be forgiven iniquity. Come near, you nations, to hear, and heed, you people. The indignation of the Lord is against all nations, fury against all their armies. He has utterly destroyed them, and he has given them over to the slaughter. Also, their slain shall be thrown out. So it's talking about war right here. My sword shall be bathed in heaven. Indeed, it shall come down on Edom and on the people of my curse for judgment. The sword of the Lord is filled with blood. It is the day of the Lord's recompense, the year of recompense for the cause of Zion. Its streams shall be turned into pitch, dust into brimstone. The land shall become burning pitch. It shall not be quenched night or day. Its smoke shall ascend forever. From generation to generation it shall lie waste. No one shall pass through it forever and ever. Animals will dwell in it. Thorns shall come up in its palaces, nettles and brambles in its fortresses. It shall be a habitation of jackals, a courtyard for ostriches. So beasts, okay. The wild beasts of the desert shall also meet with the jackals. Okay, then in chapter 35, this is the relevant chapter that matches chapter 40. Because if chapter 36 to 39 was added by scribes from 2 Kings, you remove those chapters, 35 directly flows into chapter 40. So the war was just being talked about in these chapters. Now, here is the wasteland, the wilderness. The wilderness and the wasteland shall be glad for them, and the desert shall rejoice and blossom as the rose. It shall blossom abundantly and rejoice, even with joy and singing. The glory of Lebanon shall be given to it, the excellence of Carmel and Sharon. They shall see the glory of the Lord, the excellency of our God. Okay, then this sounds like the New Testament stuff. Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, the ears of the deaf shall be unstopped. Then the lame shall leap like a deer, the tongue of the dumb sing. For waters shall burst forth in the wilderness, and streams in the desert. The parched ground shall become a pool, the thirsty land springs of water. In the habitation of jackals, where each lay, grass with reeds and rushes. A highway shall be there. I have to go, guys, in a second. But a highway shall be there and a road. It shall be called the highway of holiness. The unclean shall not pass over it. And it shall be for others. Whoever walks the road, although a fool, shall not go astray. No lion shall be there, nor shall a ravenous beast go up on it. It shall not be found there, but the redeemed shall walk, and the ransom of the Lord shall return, and come to Zion with singing, with everlasting joy in their heads, and they shall obtain joy and gladness, and sorrow and sighing shall flee away. So look at this. Chapter 40 says, the voice of one crying in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord, make straight in the desert a highway for our God. And in the very prior chapter, chapter 35, assuming chapter 36 to 39 was added, the prior chapter is chapter 35, we see the highway in the wilderness mentioned. A highway shall be there, and a road, and it shall be called the highway of holiness. In the wilderness. It is literally the highway in the wilderness that's being talked about. Wilderness. The wilderness. So this is the highway in the wilderness. Shall be there. Where's there? The wilderness. So, chapter 40, the voice of one crying in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord, make straight in the desert a highway for our God. That highway for our God in the desert, in the wilderness, is this highway mentioned in chapter 35, which means this is proof that chapter 35 should be followed by chapter 40. This is proof that chapters 36 to 39 were added into the text randomly in this section. This section should not have chapter 36 to 39. It interrupts the flow of the passage, it interrupts the prophecy, and it just does not fit the style of the book of Isaiah at all. So it's from another book of Isaiah, another apocryphal book of Isaiah. So it is authentic prophecy of Isaiah, but should not be in the book of Isaiah. So when I do my reconstruction of the book of Isaiah, chapters 36 to 39 will not be in the text. It will be in 2 Kings, and it will be in the Apocrypha of Isaiah, but it will not be in this book of Isaiah. It will be removed. Chapter 35 will be directly followed by chapter 40 in my version of Isaiah, in my reconstructed version. So her warfare is ended, the warfare that was talked about in chapter 33 and 34. Her iniquity is pardoned, the iniquity that was talked about in chapter 33, 34, 35. That's the iniquity that's being pardoned. So this is the context of the prophecy. So, and also the grass, I think it mentioned grass too. Whoops, wrong thing here. Chapter 35, look at this. There shall be grass with reeds and rushes. And then it mentions grass again in chapter 40. All flesh is grass. So it's very much connected, chapter 40 to 35. So the idea that scholars think that chapter 35 was written by Proto-Isaiah and chapter 40 was written by Deutero-Isaiah is completely nonsense. Chapter 35 is very clearly written by the same person who wrote chapter 40. They're connected. They are definitely part of the same prophecy. And it just flows. Chapter 40 then continues the flow. So they say chapter 40 goes all the way to chapter 55 in terms of flow and style. So the fact is, the person who wrote chapters 40 to 55 actually is the same person who wrote chapters 33 to 35, 32, pretty much all the way back to 31. And it's a general style all throughout Isaiah. Most of Isaiah is similar prophecy. So anyways, I'm going to have to stop here. Hope you guys enjoyed this. So that's basically a preview about my reconstructed version of Isaiah. There's a lot more of the book of Isaiah, obviously. So next week, we'll try to go through the rest of Isaiah, chapters 40. Obviously, we're not going to get through the whole thing, but we'll try to do as much of Isaiah as we can. 40 to 66. Maybe we'll get through it. We can try. And then after that, we'll go to Jeremiah books next. And I'll show you guys the work that we've done on Jeremiah, because there's some interesting things about Jeremiah as well. Anyways, guys, have a great week. God bless you guys, and shalom, and see you next week.